He's following me. Please don't let him take me. The words would stay with Jake Morrison long after the rain stopped falling. The storm rolled across Highway 17 like a living thing, turning the blacktop into a river of reflected headlights and silver streaks. Most people had already found shelter for the night, but Jake had never been most people. At 48 years old, the broad-shouldered biker sat beneath the canopy of a small gas station outside Pine Ridge, listening to rain hammer against the metal roof while his Harley-Davidson cooled beside him. His leather vest was dark with water, the Hell's Angels patch on his back drawing cautious glances from the few travelers still brave enough to stop. Jake ignored them. He wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee and stared into the darkness beyond the pumps. Something about the night felt unsettled. Years in the military had taught him to trust that feeling. Then he saw movement. At first it looked like a shadow darting between sheets of rain. A second later, the shadow became a child. A little girl burst from the tree line near the highway and sprinted toward the station. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her blonde hair clung to her face, soaked by the storm. Mud splattered the knees of her jeans. Her small sneakers slipped against the pavement as she ran. She wasn't playing. She wasn't lost. She was terrified. Jake set down his coffee and stood. The girl glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear behind her. Then she spotted the biker. For a split second, fear flashed across her face. Most children were taught to stay away from men who looked like Jake Morrison. Tattoos covered his forearms. A scar crossed one cheek. His beard was streaked with gray. But whatever frightened her in the darkness frightened her more than the biker standing beneath the gas station lights. She ran straight toward him. The girl collided with his side, nearly knocking herself off balance. Jake caught her before she fell. Her entire body trembled. Tiny fingers clutched the front of his vest. She struggled to catch her breath. "Hey, sweetheart," Jake said softly, lowering himself to one knee. "You're okay. Slow down. What's wrong?" The girl looked up at him with wide blue eyes filled with panic. Rainwater mixed with tears on her cheeks. Then she whispered the words that instantly changed the night. "He's following me." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. "Who is?" The girl shook her head violently. "Please don't let him take me." Jake glanced toward the road. Empty. He looked toward the woods. Darkness. Nothing moved except branches swaying beneath the storm. Still, every instinct told him the child believed every word she was saying. He removed his heavy leather jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The oversized garment nearly swallowed her whole. She pulled it tight around herself. "What's your name?" Jake asked. "Emily." "Okay, Emily. My name is Jake." Her breathing began to slow slightly. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are your parents nearby?" The question caused her expression to fall. Emily lowered her eyes and didn't answer. That silence worried Jake more than anything else. Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the mountains. A pickup truck passed on the highway, spraying water across the shoulder. The gas station clerk stepped outside and stared curiously at the scene before retreating back indoors. Emily suddenly grabbed Jake's arm. "Don't let him see me." Jake followed her gaze. Across the road, beyond the curtain of rain, a figure stood near the edge of the woods. Too far away to identify. Too still to ignore. Jake narrowed his eyes. The figure remained motionless for several seconds. Then a flash of lightning illuminated the highway. When the darkness returned, the figure was gone. Jake kept his eyes fixed on the spot where the figure had been standing. Rain continued to pour across the highway, blurring the distant tree line into a wall of gray. Emily's small fingers tightened around his arm. She was still shaking beneath the oversized leather jacket. Whatever she had seen out there, it was real enough to leave fear etched into every movement she made. Jake slowly stood and guided her toward the convenience store attached to the gas station. Warm yellow light spilled through the windows, offering a sharp contrast to the storm outside. The bell above the door chimed as they stepped inside. The smell of fresh coffee and hot dogs turning on rollers filled the air. Behind the counter, an older clerk glanced up from a magazine and immediately noticed the frightened child standing beside the biker. Jake nodded politely. The clerk nodded back, but wisely kept his questions to himself. Emily stayed close, almost, hiding behind Jake whenever the door opened or a customer walked by. Jake led her to a small booth near the back of the store. Rain tapped against the glass beside them. The storm seemed even louder now. He grabbed a bottle of water, a turkey sandwich, and a package of crackers from the cooler before setting them in front of her. At first, Emily simply stared at the food. Then her eyes widened slightly. "You can eat," Jake said gently. "No rus." She looked at him as though asking permission one more time. When he nodded, she opened the sandwich and began eating. Not quickly, not greedily, just carefully, like someone afraid the food might disappear if she moved too fast. Jake watched in silence. Something about that bothered him. Children who felt safe usually ate without hesitation. Emily ate like someone who had learned not to expect another meal anytime soon. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. The clerk turned up the volume on a small television mounted above the counter. A weather alert flashed across the screen, warning drivers to avoid several flooded roads. Emily suddenly glanced toward the front windows. "Can he see me in here?" she whispered. "Who?" Jake asked. She lowered her voice even more. "The man." Jake leaned back slightly. "Emily, did you know him?" The girl stared at the table. Her fingers picked at the edge of a cracker. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly nodded. "What is his name?" Her shoulders stiffened. "I did not want to say it." Jake did not push. Years ago, during military training, he had learned that frightened people rarely opened up when pressured. Trust had to come first. "That is okay," he said. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to tell me." Emily seemed relieved by that answer. She took another bite of her sandwich. The storm outside rattled the windows. After a long silence, Jake asked a different question. "Do you have family nearby?" Emily's expression changed again. Not fear this time. Sadness. Deep sadness that looked far older than 8 years. "My mom did." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Did?" Emily stared down at the table. "She is gone." The words were barely audible. Jake looked away for a moment. He knew loss. He knew the empty space it left behind. "I am sorry." "Sweetheart." Emily nodded without looking up. Another minute passed. Then she said something that made Jake pay even closer attention. "Nobody listens when I tell them things." "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the rain-covered windows again. "I told people before." Jake remained silent. "I told teachers." Her voice trembled slightly. "I told other grown-ups." She swallowed hard. "They always said everything was fine." Jake felt an uneasy sensation settle in his chest. And was everything fine? Emily shook her head. Tears formed in her eyes again. "No." Jake was about to ask another question when the front door opened. Cold wind rushed inside. Every muscle in Emily's body instantly locked up. Her eyes widened. Her breathing stopped. She stared toward the entrance as though she had just seen a ghost. The moment the door opened, Emily's hand shot across the table and grabbed Jake's sleeve. Her eyes never blinked. They remained locked on the entrance as a tall man stepped inside, shaking rain from a dark umbrella. He looked completely ordinary. Mid-40s, clean haircut, button-down shirt beneath a waterproof jacket. The kind of man nobody would notice in a crowd. The kind of man who could stand beside you in a grocery store and be forgotten 5 minutes later. Yet the fear on Emily's face deepened the second she saw him. Jake noticed every detail. The trembling lip, the stiff shoulders, the way she instinctively tried to make herself smaller. The man scanned the store casually before approaching the counter. He smiled politely at the clerk. He even nodded toward Jake. Nothing about him appeared threatening. That bothered Jake more than if the man had looked dangerous. Emily lowered her voice until it was barely audible. "That is him." Jake kept his expression neutral. "Are you sure?" She nodded immediately. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just pure conviction. The man purchased a cup of coffee and exchanged a few friendly words with the clerk. Then he turned and appeared to notice Emily for the first time. His face instantly brightened. "Emily." The girl flinched. Jake felt it through the sleeve she was gripping. The man walked closer, stopping several feet away. "There you are." His voice was calm and pleasant. "I've been worried sick." Jake slowly stood. The biker's large frame rose between Emily and the stranger. The man offered a polite smile. "Thank you for looking after her." He extended a hand. Daniel Cross. Jake looked at the hand, but did not shake it. Jake. Daniel withdrew his hand without offense. Emily wandered off during the storm. I've been searching everywhere. Emily's eyes dropped to the table. She said nothing. Daniel continued speaking. She has been through a difficult year. Her mother passed away several months ago. His voice softened with practiced sympathy. Everything has been very hard on her. Jake glanced toward Emily. The little girl remained silent. She is under my guardianship, Daniel explained. The county approved everything after her mother's death. He reached into his jacket and removed a wallet. A moment later, he produced identification and several folded documents. I understand how this might look. Jake examined the papers. They appeared legitimate. Official seals. Signatures. County paperwork. Daniel seemed prepared for every question before it was asked. Emily, Daniel said gently. Come on, let's go home. Emily's fingers tightened around the edge of Jake's jacket. She did not move. Daniel's smile weakened slightly. Emily, still nothing. Rain continued tapping against the windows. The gas station suddenly felt much smaller than before. Jake crouched beside her. Sweetheart, he said quietly. Do you know this man? Emily nodded once. Do you live with him? Another nod. Jake studied her face carefully. Do you want to go with him? The question seemed to hang in the air forever. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She stared at the floor. Then she whispered something so softly Jake almost missed it. No, Daniel sighed and rubbed his forehead as if exhausted. You see what I mean? He said. She has been struggling since her mother passed. She does this sometimes. Jake looked back toward the girl. Why do you not want to go? Emily swallowed hard. Several seconds passed before she finally lifted her eyes toward him. The sadness there felt much older than 8 years. Because nobody listens when I tell them the truth. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. What truth? Emily looked directly at him. Her voice trembled. I told teachers. I told neighbors. I told people at church. Tears slid down her cheeks. But they always gave me back. Jake remained completely still. Then Emily asked a question so small and heartbreaking that it seemed to silence the entire room. Do grown-ups ever listen to kids? For a moment, nobody spoke. Even the clerk behind the counter seemed to sense that something important had just happened. Rain drummed steadily against the windows while Emily's question lingered in the air. Daniel's smile remained in place, but it looked slightly strained now. He released a slow breath and shook his head with the patience of someone trying to explain a difficult situation. Emily has been under a lot of emotional stress, he said calmly. Losing a parent changes a child. She does not always know how to process her feelings. Jake looked from Daniel to the little girl. Emily had lowered her eyes again, but her hands were trembling. Not the nervous fidgeting of a child who had been corrected. This was different. It was the same fear Jake had seen outside when she ran through the rain. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and carefully unfolded another document. I work closely with county services, he explained. Everything is documented. There are counselors involved, social workers, school officials. Everyone knows the situation. He placed the paper on the table. Official seals, signatures, phone numbers. Everything appeared legitimate. Jake studied the document. Nothing seemed out of place. If a sheriff walked in right now and reviewed the paperwork, there would be little reason to question it. Daniel had answers ready before questions were asked. Emily stared at the tabletop. Sweetheart, Daniel said gently, you scared everyone tonight. She did not respond. Let's go home. Still nothing. Jake noticed something else. Daniel never stepped closer than necessary. He remained controlled, measured, careful. Every word sounded rehearsed. Every expression seemed perfectly chosen. It was not enough to prove anything, but it was enough to keep Jake from feeling comfortable. The biker turned toward Emily. Look at me. Slowly, she raised her eyes. Do you feel safe? He asked quietly. Daniel immediately spoke. Jake, with all due respect, I understand you're trying to help, but Jake raised one hand slightly without taking his eyes off the girl. Daniel stopped talking. Emily's lower lip trembled. Several seconds passed. Then she whispered, no. The answer was barely audible. Yet it hit Jake harder than a shout. Daniel rubbed his forehead again. You see, he said, this is exactly what the therapist warned about. She says things like this whenever she becomes upset. Jake remained silent. Emily suddenly grabbed the edge of his vest again. Please. One word. Nothing more. Yet there was a desperation behind it that made the room feel smaller. Daniel glanced toward the clerk. I can assure you, there is no danger here. If necessary, we can contact county services right now. Maybe we should, Jake replied. Daniel blinked. It was the first genuine reaction Jake had seen from him all night. The expression lasted less than a second before disappearing behind another polite smile. At this hour? Daniel asked. Most offices are closed. Emergency contacts are not. Daniel folded his papers carefully. Of course. We can do that. The response sounded cooperative, but something in his eyes changed. Jake noticed it immediately. A flash of irritation. Tiny. Brief. Gone almost instantly. Outside, lightning illuminated the parking lot. For a split second, the entire gas station glowed white. Then darkness returned. Jake glanced through the windows. Several vehicles sat beneath the rain. Nothing unusual, yet his instincts continued whispering that something was wrong. The same instincts that had kept him alive through difficult years. Emily leaned closer. He always knows what to say, she whispered. Jake heard her. Daniel did not. Everybody believes him. Jake looked down at her. What? Tears filled her eyes again. Because he looks normal. Those words landed harder than she could possibly understand. Jake slowly stood to his full height. The storm outside continued to rage. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains. Daniel watched him carefully now, no longer smiling quite as easily as before. And for the first time that night, Jake began to realize this situation might be far more complicated than a frightened child running through the rain. Daniel checked his watch and forced another patient smile. I understand your concern, he said. Truly. But Emily needs stability, not confusion. The longer this goes on, the harder it becomes for her. Jake barely heard him. His attention had drifted somewhere else entirely. Not to the storm, not to the gas station, not even to the man standing across from him. It had drifted backward through time. More than 20 years. Back to another frightened child whose words nobody wanted to hear. His younger sister, Lily. Jake had been 18 then. Too busy chasing freedom. Too busy chasing roads that led nowhere. Lily had tried to tell people something was wrong. She had spoken carefully at first. Then, desperately. But every adult around her had found a reason not to listen. Some said she was confused. Others said she was emotional. A few said she simply wanted attention. Jake still remembered the day she looked at him across their mother's kitchen table and asked a question he never forgot. Why does nobody believe me? He had not known how to answer then. The memory settled heavily in his chest now. Years later, after life had scattered their family in different directions, Jake still carried guilt for not doing more, for not asking enough questions, for assuming someone else would step in. Some mistakes never stopped following a person. They simply waited quietly in the shadows. Emily's voice pulled him back to the present. Jake! He looked down. Her blue eyes searched his face. He realized she had asked something. Sorry, sweetheart. What was that? Are you leaving too? The question struck harder than she could possibly know. She was not asking about tonight. She was asking something much bigger. Jake saw it in her eyes. How many people had walked away from this child after promising they would help? How many had convinced themselves it was not their responsibility? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. This is becoming inappropriate, he said. I appreciate what you have done, but I need to take Emily home. Jake slowly turned toward him. The biker's expression had changed. There was no anger in it, no threat, just certainty, the kind that comes when a decision has already been made. No, Jake said quietly. Daniel blinked. Excuse me. I said no. The store suddenly felt silent. Even the clerk stopped pretending not to listen. Daniel's polite mask slipped for the briefest moment. You cannot be serious. Maybe not, Jake replied. But I am not handing over a scared kid in the middle of the night because some paperwork says I should. Daniel folded his arms. You have absolutely no authority here. Maybe. Jake nodded. But I have common sense. Thunder rolled outside. Rain continued pouring across the parking lot. Daniel looked toward Emily. You know this is only making things worse. Emily immediately lowered her gaze. Jake noticed the reaction. Every time Daniel addressed her directly, she seemed to shrink. Not because she was being scolded, because she expected something. Some invisible consequence she had learned to anticipate. Daniel took a slow breath. What exactly are you planning to do? Jake pulled a phone from his pocket. The screen glowed in his hand. I'm planning to make a call. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. To whom? Jake scrolled through his contacts. He stopped on a familiar name. A man he trusted with his life. A man who could read trouble faster than most people could read a newspaper. Marcus Steele Donovan, president of the local chapter. Jake pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a deep voice answered. Razor. It is nearly midnight. What is going on? Jake watched the rain slide down the windows. He glanced at Emily sitting quietly beneath his leather jacket. Then he looked directly at Daniel. I need eyes everywhere, he said, and I think I need them right now. Marcus did not ask unnecessary questions. That was one of the reasons Jake trusted him. Years of riding together had created an understanding that went beyond words. If Jake called after midnight and asked for help, something serious was happening. How many eyes do you need? Marcus asked. Jake glanced toward the rain-covered windows. All of them. A brief silence followed. Then Marcus answered. Give me 15 minutes. The call ended. Daniel folded his arms. You are turning a simple misunderstanding into something much bigger. Jake slipped the phone back into his pocket. Maybe. Daniel exhaled slowly. You have no idea what damage this kind of confusion can cause, child. Jake looked toward Emily. She was sitting quietly in the booth beneath the oversized leather jacket. For the first time since arriving, she seemed slightly calmer. Not safe. Not comfortable. Just calmer. The difference was small, but Jake noticed it. Funny, he said. She seems more relaxed now than she did 20 minutes ago. Daniel did not respond. Outside, the storm continued sweeping across the mountains. Water streamed down the glass like rivers. Headlights occasionally passed along the highway before disappearing into the darkness. The clerk nervously wiped the counter while pretending not to listen. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Daniel checked his watch several times. His patience appeared to be wearing thin. This cannot continue forever, he finally said. Sooner or later someone official is going to arrive and tell you exactly what I have been telling you. Jake shrugged. Maybe. Then a distant sound drifted through the rain. Low at first, almost impossible to hear. A vibration more than a noise. Emily looked toward the windows. Jake smiled slightly. He knew that sound. Every rider knew it. One motorcycle, then another, then several more. The rumble grew steadily louder. Daniel stepped toward the glass. His expression changed for the first time that evening. Headlights appeared through the storm. One pair became 3. 3 became 6. Then 10. The motorcycles rolled into the parking lot one after another, their chrome reflecting flashes of lightning. Rain poured from helmets and leather jackets as the riders parked beneath the gas station lights. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. They simply arrived. Calm. Organized. Intentional. Marcus Steele Donovan stepped through the front door first. At 58, the chapter president carried himself with quiet confidence. His silver beard was soaked from the storm. Water dripped from the brim of his cap. Behind him came several other riders. Men and women from different backgrounds, different professions, different lives. Yet every one of them had answered the same call. Marcus approached Jake. What do we have? Jake nodded toward Emily. Scared kid. Then toward Daniel. Complicated situation. Marcus studied both for several seconds. His eyes eventually settled on the little girl. His expression softened immediately. Hello there. Emily offered a cautious wave. Marcus smiled warmly. You hungry? Emily nodded. Within minutes, another rider returned from a nearby diner, carrying fresh food and hot chocolate. A female rider named Rachel sat beside Emily and quietly talked about her own grandchildren. The little girl's shoulders slowly relaxed. Meanwhile, the rest of the riders spread throughout the gas station and parking lot. Some remained near the pumps. Others watched the road. Nobody blocked exits. Nobody threatened anyone. They simply paid attention. Marcus eventually stepped beside Jake near the window. "What is your gut telling you?" he asked quietly. Jake watched Daniel, standing alone near the counter. "My gut says something does not fit." Marcus nodded. "Mine too." At that exact moment, one of the riders entered through the side door carrying a soaked rain jacket. "Marcus," he said, "you need to see something." The rider held up a photograph he had taken moments earlier. "There is a vehicle parked behind the tree line about 200 yards from here." Jake frowned. "So?" The rider looked directly at him. "Because somebody is sitting inside it watching this gas station." The photograph immediately changed the mood inside the gas station. Marcus studied it first. Then he handed it to Jake. The image showed a dark SUV partially hidden behind a stand of pine trees, roughly 200 yards from the highway. Rain streaked across the windshield, making details difficult to see, but one thing was obvious. The vehicle had a clear view of the gas station. "How long has it been there?" Marcus asked. "At least 30 minutes, the rider replied. "Engine running the entire time." Jake looked toward Daniel. The man appeared calm, but not quite as calm as before. A small crease had formed between his eyebrows. "Probably someone waiting out the storm," Daniel said. "People do that all the time." Nobody answered. Marcus folded the photograph and slipped it into his pocket. "Maybe." Another rider entered from outside, carrying a tablet protected beneath a rain cover. He approached Marcus and lowered his voice. "You asked us to check what we could find." Marcus nodded. "What did you get?" "Not much at first." The rider glanced toward Daniel. Then things started getting strange. Jake stepped closer. The rider opened several public records on the screen. The guardianship documents appear legitimate, but the timeline is messy. Marcus frowned. "Messy how?" "Different addresses. Multiple counties. Several school transfers over a short period." Jake looked toward Emily. She was sitting beside Rachel, quietly sipping hot chocolate. For the first time all night, she almost looked like a normal child. Almost. "How many schools?" Jake asked. "4 in less than 2 years." Marcus exchanged a glance with him. That alone was unusual. The rider continued scrolling. "And there is something else." He opened another page. Several welfare checks were requested by neighbors at previous addresses. Daniel immediately stepped forward. "This is ridiculous." His voice remained controlled, but the confidence was fading. "You're digging through private records without context." Marcus remained calm. "Maybe. So give us context." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jake noticed. The rider kept reading. Each report was closed without action. He paused, but every one of them mentioned concerns raised by children. Silence filled the room. Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Emily had said nobody listened. Suddenly those words carried much more weight. Daniel crossed his arms. "Do you know how many false concerns get reported every year?" "A lot," Marcus replied. "Enough that nobody panics over one report." He looked directly at Daniel. "But 4. Daniel had no immediate answer. Across the room, Emily quietly set down her cup. "I told him to." Every head turned toward her. The little girl looked at the floor. The people before. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I told them." Rachel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Told them what, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated. "That I wanted to stay somewhere else." Jake noticed tears forming in her eyes again. "What happened?" Emily swallowed hard. "They said Mr. Cross was taking care of me." Daniel immediately stepped forward. "Because I was." Emily flinched. The reaction was instant. Uncontrolled. Real. Jake saw Marcus notice it too. The chapter president slowly folded his arms. Outside, lightning flashed across the parking lot. For a brief second, the gas station windows glowed white. One of the riders near the entrance suddenly touched an earpiece. His expression changed. "Marcus!" "What?" The SUV just pulled out. Everyone looked toward him. "Where's it going?" The rider peered through the rain-covered glass. "Not away." He paused. "It is coming here." Rain hammered the parking lot so hard that the motorcycle seemed carved from silver and shadow. Every rider turned toward the highway as the dark SUV slowly emerged from the curtain of water. Its headlights cut through the storm before stopping near the edge of the property. Nobody moved toward it. Nobody rushed. The entire scene felt strangely calm. Marcus stepped beside Jake and folded his arms. "Everybody stays cool," he said quietly. The riders nodded. They spread naturally across the lot, some near the fuel pumps, others near the entrance, their motorcycles forming a loose line beneath the gas station lights. Inside, Emily stood from a booth and stared through the window. Rachel remained beside her. "You do not have to be afraid," she said gently. Emily swallowed hard. "I always am." Rachel's heart sank. No child should say those words as if they were normal. Outside, the driver's door of the SUV finally opened. A man stepped into the rain holding a dark umbrella. He appeared nervous. Not angry. Not aggressive. Just nervous. He glanced at the motorcycles, then at the gas station, then back toward the road, as though reconsidering his decision. Jake watched carefully. Something felt different. Marcus noticed it too. "That is not what I expected," he muttered. The man approached slowly. Water streamed from the edge of his umbrella. One of the riders met him halfway and spoke briefly before escorting him toward the entrance. When the man stepped inside, he immediately removed his glasses and wiped rainwater from them. Then his eyes landed on Daniel. The reaction was immediate. "There you are." Daniel's face drained of color. Jake noticed it instantly. So did everyone else. The nervous man looked around the room before focusing on Marcus. "I've been trying to find him for hours." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "My name is Thomas Reed." He reached into his coat and carefully removed identification. "I work with a child advocacy organization." Daniel suddenly stepped forward. "This is absurd." Thomas ignored him. "I was asked to monitor a welfare concern connected to a previous county review." Silence settled across the room. Jake glanced toward Emily. The little girl had frozen. Thomas looked at her, and his expression softened. "Emily." The girl stared at him. "You remember me?" Slowly, she nodded. Daniel immediately spoke. "This means nothing." Thomas turned toward him. "Actually, it means quite a lot." The room remained completely still. Rain rattled against the windows. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains. Thomas carefully opened a folder he had been protecting beneath his coat. "Several concerns were raised over the past 18 months, he explained. "Every investigation was closed independently because there was never enough information to move forward." He looked toward Emily. "Until now." Daniel opened his mouth, but Marcus held up one hand. "Let him finish." Thomas nodded gratefully. "Earlier tonight, we received information from another former residence connected to this case." He opened another document. The timelines do not match. Several records contain conflicting information. Jake noticed Daniel looking toward the exit. Not running. Not panicking. Just calculating. The same way a person might search for an answer when all the answers were suddenly disappearing. Emily took a small step forward. Then another. Everyone noticed. For the first time all night, she was not hiding behind anyone. Not behind Rachel. Not behind Jake. She stood on her own feet. Her voice was small but clear. "If I tell the truth now, will somebody listen?" The question seemed to stop time itself. Thomas nodded immediately. Marcus nodded too. Then Rachel. Then Jake. One by one, every person in the room gave the same answer. "Yes." Emily looked around at the faces surrounding her. For the first time since she had run out of the storm, hope replaced fear in her eyes. 6 months later, the rain was only a memory. Summer sunlight spilled across the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, painting everything in warm gold. The storm that had changed Emily's life had long passed, but the people she met that night had not disappeared. Some promises, Jake had learned, were worth keeping. The little white house at the end of Maple Street was decorated with blue balloons and ribbons. Laughter drifted through the backyard. A large banner hung between 2 trees. "Happy 9th birthday, Emily." Children ran across the grass, chasing each other, while neighbors gathered around picnic tables covered with food. For the first time in a very long time, Emily looked exactly like what she was supposed to be. A happy child. Her blonde hair bounced as she ran through the yard carrying a paper plate with a slice of cake. The fear that once seemed permanently etched into her eyes had faded. Not completely. Some scars took longer than others. But hope had taken its place. That was what mattered. Rachel stood beside the grill, talking with Emily's foster parents, a kind couple named Michael and Laura Bennett. They had opened their home months earlier and given Emily something she had not experienced in a long time. Stability, safety, love without conditions. Thomas Reed still checked in regularly through his advocacy organization. Every report was positive. Every month, Emily seemed a little stronger, a little happier, a little more like herself. Across town, the deep rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the afternoon air. Emily froze. Her eyes widened. Then a huge smile spread across her face. She knew that sound. Everyone in the backyard turned toward the street. One motorcycle appeared first. Then another. Then another. Chrome flashed beneath the sunlight. More than 20 riders rolled slowly down Maple Street before stopping in front of the house. Neighbors stepped onto porches. Children pointed excitedly. The riders parked their motorcycles and removed their helmets. Marcus Steele Donovan climbed off his bike first. Rachel laughed. Right on schedule. Jake arrived a few seconds later. He carried a large white bakery box in both hands. Emily dropped her paper plate and sprinted across the yard. Jake! He barely had time to react before she wrapped her arms around him. The big biker laughed and hugged her back. Easy there, kiddo. You came. Jake smiled. I told you I would. Emily looked past him at the long line of motorcycles. You all came. Marcus stepped forward with a grin. Well, birthdays are important. One by one, the riders entered the yard carrying gifts, balloons, and enough desserts to feed half the county. The children immediately surrounded the motorcycles, asking questions and taking pictures. The riders answered every one of them with patience. Hours passed beneath the summer sun. There were games, laughter, stories, and far too much cake. As evening approached, Emily sat beside Jake on the porch steps watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily looked up at him. Why did you help me that night? Jake stared toward the horizon. He thought about the storm, about the gas station, about the frightened little girl who had run through the rain searching for someone who would listen. Then he smiled, because somebody should have. Emily rested her head against his shoulder. The motorcycles gleamed beneath the fading sunlight. Children laughed in the distance. Friends talked around picnic tables. And for the first time in many years, Jake felt something he had not expected to find at the end of a long road. Peace. Sometimes the safest place in the world is not behind a locked door or inside a strong house. Sometimes it is standing beside people who choose to protect you when nobody else will. And on a stormy night, when one frightened little girl needed someone to listen, that choice changed everything.